2, 1. Jeremy Walford, Managing Director and founding Trustee of Middleton Hall Retirement Village. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Thanks, Simon.
It's good to have you here. So before we get stuck into the conversation, can you tell the audience a little bit more about your background and also a little bit about Middleton Hall?
Yeah. I arrived actually by accident at Middleton Hall in 1996. I turned up for 2 days for what they said they needed a bit of a business plan. It was then a biggish nursing home set in a listed building. And it was pretty apparent to me that after I'd been there for a few hours, it didn't need a business plan. It actually needed a rescue package because it was going bust. So I proposed to the then directors what needed to be done, which was fairly radical. And out of that, I ended up staying on and running it, basically, and ultimately taking over. But interestingly, from my point of view, I'd never even been to a care home before, so I knew nothing about social care. And I used to apologise for that. I now recognise that it had some benefits because we looked at things differently, and I wasn't prepared for us to do what everybody else did. One of the things I did early on is I went to visit some care homes that I was told were really good, and actually I thought they were poor because they were probably perfectly good at what they do, but actually, is it an environment that I would want to live in? No, it wasn't. And what we've tried to build in developing a retirement village is something that people would aspire to live in rather than have to live in, which is how care homes at that time actually were. So I think it's been helpful ultimately, my complete lack of knowledge about sector.
So a serendipitous moment in your life, which ended up being the trajectory for your life for what, the last 20, 25 years?
Yeah, nearly 25 years now.
Wow. Okay. And how did it actually come about? Like, what happened for you to end up being the chap that was going to come in and help with the business plan?
Well, that really is down to Leicester Forest East Service Station on the M1. In that I ran a consultancy business in London at the time, providing customer service and business planning consultancy for mostly small businesses and a few bigger companies. And I was effectively running Middleton Hall part-time and running my London business. And Middleton Hall, for those who don't know, actually is in the border of North Yorkshire and County Durham. So it's not actually fabulously convenient when you live in London.
Not so close, no.
No. So I was driving back late one Friday night, feeling pretty exhausted with everything that's going on. And I was worrying that I was going to miss some client deadlines in London. And I never missed deadlines. But I knew that it was becoming, it was incompatible trying to do these two things. So I pulled off the M1 into Leicester Forest East for a cup of tea. And by the time I came out, I realised that what I really wanted to do was run Middleton Hall full time and pack in my consultancy business. So I continued into London, explained to some of my colleagues, well, actually my then girlfriend first, actually, that I had a bit of a plan. And many of my London friends and business colleagues and my then girlfriend were frankly a bit puzzled by this idea that I had. But actually, of course, it's been this, from a business point of view, it's the best thing I've ever done.
Got you. Interesting again how those somewhat serendipitous moments can have such a lasting impact on people's lives. Absolutely.
Well, what I saw though was that with Middleton Hall, there's an opportunity to make it different and make a difference. So although I didn't even know it was called Retirement Village then, I had a very clear view of what the business should look like in the future. And it wasn't actually until I visited America that I understood it was actually a retirement village I was talking about.
Got you. That makes sense. How I can remember somebody telling me about Middleton Hall and telling me there's this chap called Jeremy Walford that's got this fantastic model up in the northeast of the country, and that maybe I should do a podcast with him at some point because he's got this employee ownership model as well, which I found absolutely fascinating. It's still something I'm really interested to learn more about because that's a really big part of Middleton Hall and also I would imagine its success too. So tell me a little bit about that side of things too.
Yeah, well, Middleton Hall, I suppose, is run in three distinct parts over the last 25 years. So part one was, financial mess, sorted out, get the business back on its feet to some degree. Phase two was building stuff. So we spent a lot of time physically changing what was here. So we refurbished parts of the care home, we started building apartments, then we started building houses. So, over a big phase of time, we spent a lot of time borrowing money, taking some risks. We built 30 apartments for sale, having never sold a property in our lives before, and then built the UK's first zero carbon housing on site during the last property recession. And some of that left us quite exposed as a business at various times, but mysteriously it all seems to have worked. The third phase then was we kind of reached a bit of a period of stability where we were making regular profit. We weren't increasing our borrowings all the time. So you then get into the thing of, well, what next? And we probably reached a size and scale as a retirement village with thick end of 200 people living on site, and it's great communal facilities, quite a big employee base. We have 180 employees working on site here because aside we've got a number of care services, and we're also running a restaurant, a swimming pool, so all that sort of hotel side of it as well, and it's quite a people intensive business. So what do you do? And the traditional options are you go and buy another site and replicate the same model. And I've always been a bit reluctant to do that. I often get asked, why haven't you built lots of Middleton Halls? And my answer is often, it wouldn't make Middleton Hall better doing that. And our focus has always been about improving what we do. The other option, which generally happens, is people sell out. And that would be probably the most obvious thing for us to do as a then mature cash generating business. But social care isn't really littered always with great examples of decent privately run independent sites being taken over and then improving. And I was wary about doing that because you also don't know who you sell to. So there is within social care the kind of feeding chain of independent care homes, especially being sold to small regional groups, being sold to national players. So you never quite know who you sell to, and various people have tried to buy us at various times, both from the care home sector and retirement village sector. But I kept asking myself, would that actually make us a better business? And my answer almost inevitably was, I'm not sure it is going to make us a better business. So during our during the last 25 years, one of the things we've always done is reinvest in the business. We've also always taken the approach that our residents come first, our employees come second, and finance comes third. So we've been very focused on quality. So if we sold out, would that change? Probably. We're a cash generating business. That's very attractive to people who are developing, particularly for developing other retirement villages. But it didn't really feel to me that I had the appetite for buying other sites and developing other retirement villages. Yes, probably make me very wealthy, but not sure I'm not terribly interested in that, in honesty. Selling out would again bring me some significant personal wealth, but actually, is that the ethos of what we do? And the answer to both those questions was no. So the third option is to find a way of protecting the ethos that we developed for the long term. So we looked into employee ownership, and that's really the route we took 2 years ago.
And that's you talk about ethos. I think that I would use a slightly different word, albeit only just from a personal preference perspective, but I would refer that back to culture, which is basically my favorite mind I think ethos and culture are two words which would probably be fairly well interchanged if you like. But there's a mind shift around ownership. There's people who write leadership books. There's been plenty of people who talk about, okay, so even if you're the employee, you want to be the CEO of your job. You want to take complete ownership for it. You want to think about it through that type of a lens. So the actual employee owned model not only encourages that mindset, but it actually provides real ownership, as in a real stake in the business. So how does it work?
Well, your point, Simon, is exactly right. And we planned employee ownership from about 6 years ago. So it's been we've been looking into it in quite a significant way. And I think part of it is that we always looked at how do we improve customer satisfaction, how do we improve the engagement of our employees? Because, as everyone knows in the sector, there's a very clear link between satisfied employees and satisfied customers.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot possibly develop high levels of customer satisfaction if you haven't got staff coming in who enjoy what they do and are very positive about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or if you can, frankly, you've got some extraordinary skills that I don't have. So, and I went and talked to employee-owned businesses, including John Lewis, which I'll come back to, and they all said, I went to visit about 10 of them over a period of time, and they all said to me, once we became employee-owned, it improved our customer satisfaction, it improved our employee engagement and our employee satisfaction, reduced our staff turnover, improved our recruitment. So lots of positives from a culture point of view, if you like. So that all sounded good to me. And there are two models of employee ownership. So direct ownership, which is when people buy shares. Problem with that is that if you're a carer joining a care service, are you really going to want to put your hand in your pocket to buy some shares when you join? Probably not. Fine if you're in a sort of like partnership type of model in professional services, but probably not for us. And then you've got the indirect share ownership, which is the John Lewis model. And John Speed and Lewis, who set that up for John Lewis, was, I think, incredibly insightful and forward thinking in what he actually did. So effectively, we're now run ultimately by a trust, and that consists of an independent chair who is an expert in employee ownership sector, 2 trustees elected by our employees, and 2 elected by the board, and they have the ultimate, they're the ultimate decision makers in the organisation. And then we have a board of directors, just like we've always had. In fact, exactly the same board with one change more recently. And the business then runs as it always has done. And one of the things which we've not yet quite got right is understanding the difference between ownership and leadership, because you can't run a business with 180 employees, or co-owners as we now call them, with everyone making decisions. So you still need leadership to be exactly the same. But your point about engagement and real ownership, ultimately all our 180 co-owners own the business. And the trust are there to represent their best interests. So that's kind of the way the structure works. We've then built in some things which we feel should preserve the long-term ethos and the quality of what we do. So the way we put a bonus structure, so John Lewis, for example, they pay a percentage when they're paying bonuses, because obviously they're having a tough time on high streets at the moment, but they pay a percentage of people's salary. Our structure is that we pay flat rate. So everybody, whether or not you're managing director, or whether or not you're a carer, or whether or not you're a front of house in our restaurant, you receive the same cash bonus.
Okay.
So that rewards the people proportionately better at the lower end of the pay spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is those are the people that make the biggest difference to our customers on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
So that's designed. Now, we haven't yet paid a bonus yet because we're newly employee owned, and I think we won't probably feel employee ownership is really working until we pay that first bonus.
Sure.
But in addition, the trust is set up so that when we as a business make a profit, we have to make any bank repayments and things out of that. There's a percentage that has to be reinvested in the business every year. That's part of the structure. There's a percentage that goes to a charity we set up separately around sustainability. It's an environmental charity. And then what is left can then be distributed as a profit share bonus. So what it should avoid us doing is overpaying bonuses and not reinvesting in the business. Mm-hmm. Because if we do that, our customers are going to tell us about it. And one of the quality measures is the level of customer satisfaction we're achieving. So if it dips below a certain amount, we cannot pay any bonuses. So it's very focused on customer, and they're at the heart of what we're actually trying to achieve with this.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I know a couple of people who worked for John Lewis over the years, and that the mindset of ownership has an impact on that person, and when there are profits being distributed, obviously that's a great day, because you feel great about what you're doing. You're contributing to something as a team together, and it's not just a case of okay, great, well, this is fab because we're all working together, and we're all working together towards a common vision. But also, if that happens and then you get a bonus in your pay packet, then obviously it's a great way to reward people.
Yeah, and I think it is noticeable when you go into Waitrose or John Lewis, they do feel different from other retailers, and the culture of the organisation is different, and a lot of that is because of the way they're set up. So I do think it's different, and I think for social care, I'm not convinced that social care is in this country is going to operate as effectively as it can if the sole purpose of it is about making profit. And I think it's too important for the country, actually, and I think the pandemic has probably highlighted this more. Both domiciliary care and care homes are really important parts of our overall health system, and I'm absolutely not convinced that if you have only a financially driven model, I'm not convinced that's necessarily a great thing for the sector. So, ultimately, there's been a lot of stuff about private equity in our sector, which helps develop particular cultural models. And I happen to think employee ownership offers an alternative to that, which should and could feel different.
And it will attract a certain type of profile of person, whereas I don't think there's any kind of right and wrong. It's what's right for the culture of the organisation. But I, as you can probably tell by my enthusiasm for the conversation, I think it's a great thing, and I think for the right organisations, it's something that can work extremely well. So, no, it's good to unpack that, and interesting to hear how it's worked for you and for the team. So, one of the things that you mentioned there was, of course, the COVID set of circumstances. So people will, of course, be interested to hear how COVID has impacted Middleton Hall. I guess best place to start would be, so what's your experience been like?
Well, I would say that I just want to say from an employee ownership point of view, I think we've probably, it's been unhelpful because we've had to take a lot of very quick, very top-driven decisions during it, and that's probably not quite the concept of employee ownership, but I think everyone's understood that. What's been interesting from an employee ownership point of view is that we said to both the trust and the board, look, we're clearly, and then we said this at the beginning of March, we're in a pandemic situation, and we need to really focus on looking after people here, and that means we need to look after our residents and look after our co-owners. So we will take some. So the trust and the board were utterly aligned that our strategy should be about looking after people, and we should put money to one side. So we said to the trust, we will probably make half level profitability for the next quarter, assuming it turns to a pandemic, and everyone was like, that's absolutely fine. So it made it easier to take decisions about not taking people out of hospital, being very careful. We were early on, having co-owners self-isolate, all those sorts of things we could do without worrying about the impact on profitability. Now, as it turns out, we've actually done better financially than we might have anticipated. It's not been quite as bad as we thought, but we took very early action. So we put our pandemic plan into action. We started talking about it in early February because we had a plan, because the NHS told us in 2004 that there might be a pandemic with avian flu. And we've had a contingency plan ever since for that. So we went very early into action. We did briefings in February for our residents and for our co-owners to say, this is what happens if it turns into a pandemic. This is our plan. So we forewarned people some restrictions that were put in place. We went into our own version of lockdown relatively early. We were very firm on taking people out of hospital. So we were under a bit of pressure from some of the hospitals on that, but we gave them an admissions criteria, which frankly they couldn't meet, which involved testing and quarantining, self-isolation, etc. And we did a lot of preparation. So we closed down a lot of our central facilities very early on. So our restaurant, our swimming pool, which then got converted into what was then called the Rainbow Centre. So that we set up as like a hospital ward. So if anybody had got COVID, we'd run that with separate staffing, with very stringent infection control procedures to get them out of the way of other residents, essentially. So we're naturally cohorted anyway, in that all our care services, although we've actually got 90 beds on site, they're split up into individual units with their own managers, their own staffing teams. So we're naturally cohorted. Our biggest one would be our nursing care. So we immediately split that into two. So our biggest service, that way would have been about 14. And then no one worked in, if they worked in one of those units, that's the only place they worked. We put our Living Well team, who worked in a spa, into the care services on a dedicated basis. So they could replace a lot of the good things we're able to normally do, like having our orangery and swimming pool and exercise classes and all these things, actually within the services to keep resident morale up. We went out and bought all sorts of technology to help residents communicate with families. And we've had no cases. So whilst around us, some of our fellow care homes have had some pretty difficult times, and it would, the vast majority have had some cases. We've actually had no cases, but we've been very, very stringent from very early on. So we started really communicating properly at the end of February.
Sure. What would you say the single biggest thing is that do you think that had the impact there that's led to you having no cases?
I think probably in some ways communication, because we've been very clear, people telling people what we're going to do and why. So everyone's bought into it. And what we have found interesting is that our customer satisfaction's increased during this. Which is partly because people have had confidence in what we've been doing, but also I think because we've done a lot of communication, so we haven't given any people surprises. We said, this is what we're doing, be it to visitors, and I think everyone's understood the principles of what we're trying to do and respected that. So the families of our residents and the residents have all worked with us on it. So I think in many ways, early communication, I think, has been really important. I think lots of the measures we've taken have really helped. We had no hesitation in paying our co-owners to self-isolate if they sneezed anywhere near the building. They were off for 14 days. So we took everyone out of circulation who we felt there was any risk with. And all the way through, we said, we will be overcautious rather than undercautious. So if in doubt, we take the cautious approach.
And it seems to have served you very well. So that's good.
Well,
and touching
so
wood.
far, Simon, I don't think we're through it yet. So so far, it seems to have worked. I think the other thing that's been interesting for us is our independent living residents, so those that live in houses and apartments, leasehold properties, their satisfaction's gone up the most of anybody, because what they've seen is the value of a retirement village. Because of course, they are, many of them are vulnerable people. Vast majority of them will be over 70. And they found all sorts of things that they never realized we could do, like deliver groceries to their front door, provide like a delivery style hot meal service. So my weekend job's been, running around hot meals for our residents. And we've also provided them very clear guidance. So they've recognized, many of them have written to me or emailed me, because we don't do letters anymore. They've emailed me saying, we now realize what a good decision it was to move to Middleton Hall, because they've seen the real benefit of being in a community. And of course, we have grounds, and we have quite nice weather for most of the pandemic, which helps. And actually, we were able, after the general hiatus died down, we were able to do things like outdoor exercise classes. So, several times a week, you wander around our apartment block and you'll see people on balconies and patios all doing exercises to music in the courtyard. We do our bowling green, which hasn't been operating generally. We've had socially distanced exercise classes on that. So there's lots of things we've been able to do and try and balance resident welfare and safety all the way through.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like the approach that you've taken has yielded value. Well, firstly, safety, of course, but then also value for the people that are working with you and that are living with you as well. So that's fab news.
I don't think so. I should say, I don't think we can ever guarantee we won't get cases. However, what we can guarantee is we've done our absolute best to deal with the pandemic, and I think our customers are very respectful of that.
Yeah, that's it's clear from what you said that's obviously been absolutely key, and I think some of those decisions that you made earlier on seem to have paid off really, really well for you. So I'm obviously delighted to hear that, having heard some not so good stories recently as well. So as you say, long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only other thing I would say is that it's probably helped us being independent. So we're a single site operator, and that's allowed us to take very quick decisions. So, something would come out to do a policy at 10 o'clock in the morning, we could have it in place by 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And whatever was happening, we could respond to it very, very quickly. So I think actually in many ways, fast decision making has been key, because, to be fair to the government, which, I do have some views on this, but actually everyone's dealing with unknown. No one quite knew what was going to happen. And you have to make some judgment calls, therefore. And it's hard if you're a group, be it retirement villages or care homes, getting that message out, communicating it, that is tougher. We've had the advantage of being able to make immediate decisions on site. And I was based personally on site 7 days a week for the majority of the pandemic. So we operated 7 days a week and just got on and did things.
Got you. You mentioned the government there. How do you feel about how the government have fared through the crisis? And then also, obviously, the government recently, they've abandoned their commitment for regular testing for care homes. How do you feel about that too?
I'm left pretty disappointed by the government, if I'm honest. It's accepting that we have been in absolutely unprecedented times, and it's not been easy for anybody. I feel that it does not feel like social care has been a priority. I've heard Matt Hancock saying that care homes have been a priority from day one. Well, he may well believe that, but that's not how it felt on the ground. So I think we've had confused communication, lack of information, and I think the testing has been the absolute key thing in this, because I spoke to our MP at the beginning of March about testing. So pre-lockdown or anything, I said, if we don't get testing for care homes, then we are working in the dark with what we're trying to do. It's absolutely fundamental. And the fact that we've never got regular testing. We had a big thing about testing all the care home residents once. Well, that doesn't really help. That gives you a little moment in time picture, but you have to test residents every week. The systems put in place have not worked. So I think the government support has been very disappointing. So accepting it's been very difficult for them. I don't envy that task. And accepting that Department of Health, it's been difficult because they're a policy-making unit. They're not it's not a department that's used to, making quick decisions. And I think that's been challenging for them probably. So I've got some sympathies for all of it, but actually what I find difficult is ministers and a prime minister stating that social care is being a big priority when it just has not felt like that at all.
I think it's fair to say that I know lots of care home business owners and leaders. I think it's fair to say that everyone that I speak to is in that has a very similar view, and unfortunately, is anyone going to come away with flying colours off the back of this? No, I don't think they are. But equally, at the same time, there are definitely plenty of opportunities for improvement. So, how do you see this all playing out? What do you see kind of happening in the future, relevant to how it might unfold, if you will?
Well, if I think there are three things which are absolutely key at the moment. So testing, which I already mentioned, because without that, you're working dark. And really, what we want is the saliva test with the immediate results.
Yeah.
That's where I think the government should be putting their money. Secondly, so that's got to be there. But really, then it's down to vaccine and treatment, because this virus is not going to go away. I think that's very plain when you look around the world, with a few notable exceptions like New Zealand, who've effectively closed their borders. You look what's happened in Australia, in Melbourne. Australia appeared to have almost eliminated it, and they're now back on lockdown in one of their most significant cities. You look at what's happening in some parts of Southeast Asia, who are very good at dealing with this because they've had SARS to contend with. So, Hong Kong, which had no care home deaths, because they had post-SARS, they had infection control measures in place. They do, like we do fire alarm fire drills, they do virus drills.
Oh wow, okay.
They're really, they're sophisticated, and they're still they're really struggling with it. So many countries that appear to have done well because they've got good track and trace in place and they've got plenty of testing, they're still struggling. So testing can help protect people, but it doesn't solve it. So vaccine is critical. And thirdly, treatment. So if we can't get and we don't know whether or not a vaccine will either work or last sufficiently to protect people. But if not, we just have to get a lot better at treating people with it who are the ones who are going to absorb NHS time. So I would say, in terms of where the government needs to spend their money, testing, and I think that needs to be on the spot tests, the saliva tests, which I think have been piloted in East London recently. That would be number one. Number two, vaccine. Number three is treatment.
As I understand it, I read a headline. I haven't read the whole thing. There's a company called DNA Nudge that do the immediate saliva testing.
Yeah.
And it is my understanding, I'm maybe misquoting this, I'm just caveating the fact that I only read the headline, but I understand apparently we're going to get that in September, and that's going to be rolled out. But yeah, I'll leave people to kind of do their own research as to whether that's the case. Now, obviously, September's a reasonable way away, but that would be a big leap forward if we can do that at scale and consistently, of course.
Yeah, and if it's accurate, I mean, that's huge, because actually it changes even the way visiting can work. It changes the way residents can move around. If we could test every carer before they walked in the building every day, that utterly changes the way things work.
100%, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Which is so frustrating, which relevant to the government's abandonment of the original plan, because that was going to have such a positive impact. So let's hope for some more positive news in the not too distant future, let's say. So
yeah. Well, we've got a period of time during August and maybe early September when these things will be put in place. I mean, I really welcome the social care task force that's been set up, and I've spoken to one of the members of that. Because that actually, but they've got a limited period of time, because there's no question that it's going to come back in the autumn unless we get the vaccine.
Yeah.
And talking to someone recently from Imperial, the combination of seasonal flu and COVID this winter is a pretty worrying. We've had this pandemic during summer. Everyone's outside.
Yeah.
Winter, everyone goes indoors, so spread of infection is completely different. And the scientists, clearly are concerned about what happens this winter if we haven't got things in place.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the thing that everyone's concerned about is, right, we're going to see a second spike. How big's the spike going to be? What's going to be the impact of it? And I guess we don't know. So for all the reasons why we've talked about testing and everything else, that's why we need it, and before Christmas, so that people can act pragmatically and to be able to conduct themselves in a way they're well informed around what they should and they shouldn't be doing, not with any ambiguity, but to be really, really, really clear, and hopefully that will see us through to come out of it reasonably well unscathed. I think to think about, there's always going to be an impact, but it's got to be a case of damage limitation just as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think I should say, I think there are some things which are absolutely critical for this winter. There is one good thing about all of this, of course, which is that it has properly illustrated the importance of sorting out social care, which has been on every government agenda since I can remember and has never yet been sorted, because generally they're too scared of what that actually means. This gives us the opportunity, because it's been so much in headlines. Everyone's been acutely aware of what a dreadful time social care homes especially have had during this. So hopefully that opportunity will be taken by the government about saying we now need to think about how we go forward with social care.
The one thing I keep on saying is, if not now, when? I just can't imagine a more significant set of circumstances for senior ministers to think, hold up, we actually need to do something properly about this, because it wasn't, in lots of ways, it wasn't working particularly well before. You're going to throw a global pandemic into the equation, and it's going to start making those things that were a bit creaky starting to just fall to pieces, of course, as well. Yeah. So.
But isn't it interesting that when Theresa May talked about the so-called dementia tax, the Tory party immediately backed off the whole idea within 48 hours in that election. Recently, there's been talk about an over 40s tax, and I haven't read anybody saying that's a bad idea. I wonder why.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I've given this quite a lot of thought around the public perception of care, and it's been something that I've thought about, and I feel that until a decent proportion of the public understand why social care is important, what it actually does, and how it integrates with the wider healthcare system, people won't. It's not significant enough for the people to want to accept it and to appreciate it. So, albeit we've had obviously lots of challenges and there's been a lot of negative press about social care, I think people are starting to twig the fact that actually this isn't something that we can ignore. This isn't something that's going to go away. And I think hopefully members of the public are starting to see that actually, hang on a second, either me directly or me indirectly, I'm going to have an experience of social care, and it needs to work, and it needs to work now, and it needs to work into the future.
Yeah. And what works in the future is not necessarily what it looks like now either.
Absolutely right. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Just before we wrap things up, what would you say your top 3 greatest learnings have been from the COVID set of circumstances, and what are going to be the things that you take forward into the future, having experienced what you've experienced?
Well, I think we've all learned that we can operate differently in terms of technology, and I think there are some positives from that. In terms of efficiency of meetings, I think second thing is that we've learned certainly as a business, we've learned the benefits of communicating even more. I thought we communicated very well with our customers and our co-owners, but of course we've done it on we've done weekly bulletins throughout since February, all the way through this, and actually we've seen the benefits of that. So I think there's some things about keeping people engaged through communication which will be important.
Yeah.
I think we've learned that there are many creative things that we can do as a retirement village, which we probably hadn't thought about before, which are very beneficial from the community point of view. And I'll then go back to the point about, I think everyone's learned social care is incredibly important. That if that comes out as one of the biggest learnings from this, then our sector might be better to go forward.
Let's hope. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights today on the Care Home Show. It's been great having you on.
No, still, Simon. Appreciate your time as well.